Good morning and welcome to Carolina Cares, an iHeart Media production. My name is Tyler Ryan, your host, and although Cowboy Troy made it sound kind of fun, his favorite song, I Play Chicken with a Train, Chicken with a Train, that is about the most ridiculously stupid thing you could actually attempt to do, playing chicken with a vehicle that's 4,000 times bigger than your car. The instances of train accidents where it's whether it's a car versus train, somebody gets hit. There's an incident in South Carolina. There have been thankfully only 29 incidents as through July anyway, not quite through September, but through July, and that's down sharply from 44 in 2018. So that is a good trend, and that trend is partly through education, and that education primarily comes through a national, international group now, but a South Carolina organization as well called Operation Lifesaver. And joining me from South Carolina, Operation Lifesaver, the director, I guess the development director, you might say, the boss, the coordinator.
I'm the coordinator,
any
absolutely.
Of those. You need a bigger business card. Janice Cowen, good morning to you.
Great, thank you so much.
So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, you make light of it a little bit, that song, I Played Chicken with a Train, but unfortunately, people have been known to be that ridiculous.
There are people who tempt their lives by not only playing chicken with a train, as in trespassing on the tracks and standing in front of a train, but also with a car. People attempt to try to beat a train, unfortunately, daily. And we are trying to remind people that those trains are humongous. Your average freight train is going to weigh about 12 million pounds.
I'm sorry, 12 million
12 million pounds. So I just don't think you really want to put yourself in a vehicle in front of that, or certainly not as a person in front of that train when it's coming down the tracks.
And we've heard, we've all heard the tragedies where someone, their car stalls, right on the tracks. It can't get off. It gets hung up. We've heard the train accidents where, you're on the wrong rail and it's a train versus train, and we lose lives that way. And there's the accounts where you're walking down the train tracks, and we probably all did as kids back in the day, wearing your Walkman and you're not really thinking about it. And before you know it, a train's sneaking up on you, and you're right, you got a 4 million pound vehicle coming your way. You ain't got time to go. No, you don't. You
and I believe it or not, they're actually quite quiet, unless they're going through a city where there are a lot of crossings and they blow their whistle as mandated. They can actually sneak up on you without even realizing it. And unfortunately, the engineers become the victims in those situations. They don't want to hurt anybody. They're just doing their jobs, taking their load from one location to the other. And if they see someone on the tracks, there's very little that they can do to prevent a crash from happening. There's not a steering wheel. Right. Think about it. You've got one in your car. You can even swerve your bicycle.
You got nowhere to go. You're on a rail, for goodness sake.
But there is no steering wheel in the inside of a train. And so all they can do is put on their emergency brakes and just really hope that they stop in time or that person gets off the tracks in time.
Right. And just think about the inertia of the centrifugal force. Two big words to be using on a weekend morning.
It really is.
Big words. But, when if you've ever had to slam your brakes on to avoid a deer or something else in your car, a 2,000-pound car, and you're going 55 and it takes you, 100 feet to stop. Imagine that train going 55 or whatever with 4 million pounds of steel. That thing does not stop on a dime, y'all.
It does not. And actually, we talk about that frequently when we go out into the public and do presentations, that your average freight train is going to take 5,280 feet or more to come to a complete stop, and that is more than a mile.
Yes, if the 5,280 sounds familiar, kids, yes, that is a mile.
That is a mile. It's a good math lesson for you. And we're in football season, so another way you can look at it is that's over 18 football fields. So you think about 18 football fields back to back to back.
Right.
The engineer would not even be able to see someone at the other end of 18 football fields to know they needed to apply their brakes.
Sure.
So it really falls in our hands as pedestrians, cyclists, motorists, just to approach every crossing carefully, looking and listening. And of course, if you see something or hear something, don't attempt to beat the train.
Right, because anything can happen. What are, and you may not know, but what are the requirements? You alluded to it with them having to blow their whistles. They have to, as they come to intersections. Is that primarily the mandated law in their operation? Because otherwise they're quiet. If they're out in the middle of nowhere, there's nothing happening, they can just cruise along. They don't have to blow it every few minutes.
It is a federal mandate that they have to blow at all crossings.
Okay.
I'm not a federal expert, so I will say that I don't have the exact law for that. But they do have to blow for every crossing. And you'll hear them. I mean, it's the sound that everyone knows: 2 long blasts, a short, and then a long. It's been in a lot of songs that you just talked about.
Absolutely.
But the 2 long blasts, the short, and the long, and they have to blare that all the way through that crossing until that engine is through that crossing to alert the public.
Right, and that's a very specific sequence of blasts. Much like maritime law, there's different blasts mean different things, and it is mandated that you blast a certain way. And so that sounds like that's the same way it is covered for the railways.
Absolutely, that is their signal to the public that train is coming.
Now, at the beginning, I mentioned a couple of the stats, the 29 incidents here in South Carolina through July, 44 last year. So obviously down is good when you're talking about incidents with trains.
Sure.
But what kinds of incidents encompasses that 29? Because I'm trying to think back. We hear about the big ones where somebody gets hit by a train or a car or something happens. But I guess I can't remember 44 from last year, and I'm in the news business. So I mean, what constitutes that, and are they always fatalities, or what really goes into that number?
Sure. Well, the 44 from 2018 are all vehicular crashes. We had an additional 19 incidents with what we call trespassers if they're on the rail in a location that they're not supposed to be, which would be at a designated crossing or sidewalk. So we had 44 vehicular crashes involving trains, and then 19 individuals who were on the tracks and did not get out of the way in time.
Right.
In the situations, as you can imagine, with trespassers, there will be injuries and oftentimes fatalities. As far as vehicular safety, that goes back to other traffic safety as well. If you're wearing your seatbelt, you probably have a higher chance of not having injuries or fatalities. But when you have 12 million pounds coming at you, you just don't know what the result's going to be. And we just really want people to be careful. You did mention the 4,000 to 1. So to put it in your mind visually, 4,000 to 1 is the same weight ratio as a car is to a soda can. So a train hitting a car
that puts it together.
Has the same impact as a car rolling over a soda can. And so you can visually see the impact that has.
Sure.
And that's a car, of course, if a person's in the way of the train.
That's I mean, that's not even a think of, I guess, hitting a bug on windshield in your bug, I suppose, or, bug on your windshield in July.
Right.
Not much left to it. I can imagine.
And,
that.
it's tragic and it's sad, and we don't want to hear these stories happening.
Right.
That's why we do what we do. We have volunteers around the state that try to take this message out to the public.
Well, and the thing about it seems to me that, some accidents happen. There's things like cancer you can't prevent. There's things that certain things, bad things befall us. But it seems to me that a train incident is 100% avoidable. You don't have to cross the tracks in front of the train. You don't have to walk down the tracks listening to your music. It's 100% avoidable, is it not?
Well, if you're paying attention to the signs and signals that are there at the crossing,
right.
We can go through those if you'd like to.
Yeah, I definitely do.
Sure. So when you're driving, if you're approaching a grade crossing, the first thing you'll see is a round yellow sign with an X and an RR. Of course, that means railroad track is ahead. Then you'll have pavement markings painted on the road that also have an X and an RR. That means you're getting closer. At the track itself, you'll have the 2 white bars that make an X, and it'll actually say the words railroad crossing. So at that point, you are there at the crossing. And there'll also be a stop bar painted on the road. Okay. And that's very important for people to realize. You do not want to pass that cross.
Yeah, don't try to beat the bars and try to sneak between them, right?
Well, don't do that. But if you're stopped at a crossing, make sure you're stopped before that white line that's painted on the road. By law, you have to stop no closer than 15 and no further than 50 feet. But more importantly, we just don't want you that close, no matter what you're on or in, on foot or on a bike or in a car, because things could be hanging off that train. And we don't want you anywhere near there, so there can't be a situation where something were to hit you that's on the train.
And those rules apply whether there's arm bars or not, because some, I can think of a couple intersections in Lexington that don't necessarily have the arms that go down, because the flashing lights, so know, but you're technically crossing over, and there aren't the arms that's the real big obvious, hey, dummy, if you miss this, there's also the arm.
Right. The signs I was just talking about, we call them passive. Of course, then many of our crossings also have active warning devices, and that would be locations where you have bells and lights or bells, lights, and gates. And in those situations, they'll become activated as the train comes through. and you do not want to attempt to drive through those lights if they're flashing. And then if the gate is down or coming down, it is illegal to drive around those gates. Right. It's a 4-point violation. But more importantly, as we've mentioned, you've got a mighty large train coming down the tracks, and you just don't want to put yourself in front of that.
Right. I guess if it's you versus a train, points really don't matter at that point.
Exactly. And we also see a situation where someone may make it. Let's say they dart right around the tracks. There's that philosophy of follow the leader kind of thing, and so the second car might go or the third car might go, and then they're very much not likely to make it across. So you just never want to attempt to try to beat the train. Speaking with Janice
Cowen, she is the state coordinator for South Carolina Operation Lifesaver. Obviously, train safety awareness. That is their mission, to go out and make sure the education piece is out there. Like I've been driving for, let's say more than a couple of years. And, I know not to drive across the track, but I guess I really never paid attention specifically to what those signs you just illustrated were. I just know, okay, I know that means it's a railroad track, and I probably need to look both ways before I cross it for that reason. So is it technically illegal trespassing then for me to stroll down, like I said, listening to my Walkman if I'm walking down, having fun on the railroad tracks, walking through the woods? That is unlawful for me to do.
It is. You can cross tracks only at a designated crossing, which is at a roadway that's paved, and then at a sidewalk that is paved. And there are locations like that. So you want to make sure you're only crossing at designated crossings.
Who is the enforcement wing for that? Is it trespass? So is it are there train cops? Is it the regular police? Is it NTSB? I mean, who really has jurisdiction to say you're on the tracks, you're in trouble?
That's a good question. Really, any law enforcement officer has the right to handle someone who is trespassing on railroad tracks. There are railroad police, but we don't have that many in each state. So they have quite a large territory to cover. So it is really wonderful when our law enforcement partners, and we have fantastic ones in the state of South Carolina. And I'll tell you a story that we just had a couple days ago. But it is fine for them to worry about their citizens in their jurisdictions and make sure that they're not trespassing on the railroad tracks. But partnering, let me tell you, last week was Rail Safety Week. And we had a day dedicated to enforcement partnerships. It was called Operation Clear Track. It was the 3rd annual. And it's where we invite law enforcement agencies across the state to partner with us and find 2 locations in their jurisdiction where there's train activity, and we provide them with materials to hand out at the crossing to drivers or pedestrians. We are just thrilled to say that here in South Carolina, we had over 32 agencies participating, covering 65 different crossings in the state. There were 650 nationwide, and South Carolina had 32 of them, and we were very proud and thankful to those partners. They set it up on their own. They had their agents go out there and just send a message to the citizens in their area to be safe crossing those tracks.
Just purely education. It's funny. Listeners know my background is in law enforcement, and many years as a full-time policeman, and even still, I'm on the job, as they say. And I'm sure I must have learned it at some point, but the reason I asked about the enforcement is I guess I've forgotten it if I ever knew it, that we, in fact, as police officers do have that jurisdiction to write a trespass ticket, to, little blue tickets, cops, you know what I'm talking about. Obviously when it comes to cars, it's kind of no brainer. It's a vehicle on a highway that, I put that one together.
Sure.
But, I guess, I'm not sure I would necessarily have linked that together prior to our conversation that, hey, actually, I do have a little bit of enforcement ability. If I see this dummy walking down the railroad way, creating a potential hazard and issue, that we can take enforcement action.
And I think I would step above ability and say responsibility to the citizens in your area. If you saw someone walking down the middle of a roadway, you would say something.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
sure.
Yeah, I think it is a partnership for a reason, that we all have to work together to prevent these incidents from happening. Another thing we see quite a lot, unfortunately, on the tracks themselves is photography.
Okay.
And this has become a trend, from not only selfies, but to professional photo shoots.
Oh, there's been many a country record cover
as
with,
well as
with
filming
the artists.
and movies, and yes, so we are seeing that You have to get the proper permits and permission from the railroad to be out there. But it's just you're thinking about that photo shoot. You're thinking about that selfie. You're not thinking about the fact that a train could be coming. And as we mentioned before, they can be quite quiet. And you're thinking about that picture. You're really not worried about whether the train is coming.
When you say permission from the railroad, who owns the track? Is it a company? Is it the federal government? We always see CTX. Is that who owns everything, or is there how do I know who owns the stretch between that crosses Assembly Street in downtown Columbia versus the stretch out in Saluda? Well,
we do have different classifications of railroads. Here in the state of South Carolina, we have Class 1 railroads. That is CSX and Norfolk Southern. You mentioned CSX. And Norfolk Southern also, there are Class 1s. They have a lot of rail in our territory. Then we have short lines. There are also companies, but they operate fewer miles in smaller locations. We have Amtrak. They do not own track, but they operate on other companies' railroad tracks. So that is who they are. Now, if you see a train going through and you see a CSX engine, that doesn't necessarily mean that track is CSX track. And it's confusing to me. It's confusing to the public. But, they switch around and they use different equipment based on where it is and what business needs what. They have a system of working that out with leasing to each other. The one way you can find out if you need information or you have a issue you need to report is at every crossing in the United States, there is a blue and white sign posted at the crossing.
Okay.
That has a 1-800 number on it. So we want you to use that 1-800 number, and then it'll also have a DOT number. It's going to be 6 numbers and 1 letter. That identifies that crossing and no other in the United States. So it's kind of like the physical address for that crossing. Sure. So if there's ever a situation, get out, call that 1-800 number. That's going to go to the railroad that operates at that crossing and indicate whatever the situation is.
So that could be for broken lights, stuck.
Yes.
If you wanted to do a movie, if you're doing a movie shoot, I suppose. I mean, people do it. So that would be the number. You'd say, hey, this is perfect. You call the number. And
that could be a start. That number is primarily for emergency situations. If your car is stuck or stalled or the gates are down or you have vegetation that you think should be trimmed up, that is the number to call for those types of situations in your community. The permission is going to go to a different department, and I don't work for the railroad, so I don't exactly know if it's through legal, if it's through public relations.
Sure.
I'm sure it goes through all of them, to be quite
somewhere. Somebody's got to sign off on it, right?
So, you would have to look for. I would just Google Norfolk Southern or CSX to find out.
See what lines they own and contact.
Find out,
Just curious. Like I said, you always see, especially on country music, everybody's out there taking pictures.
And they're gonna require certain things. They're gonna have to have CSX or Norfolk Southern employees out there. They just want everybody to be safe. And we don't want situations that we have heard about happening on the tracks.
To that end, Miss Janice, if you could share a couple of stories, maybe just to really drive home the point of bad things that can happen, of stuff that the organization is seeing that you're aware of with Operation Lifesaver.
Well, I'll tell you, last week during Rail Safety Week, we were releasing testimonial videos every day, a different tragic event that happened. One of them was John's story. It was about a young man who unfortunately was out on the rails with his girlfriend taking photographs, and his sister was taking the pictures. The girlfriend went over to look and see how the pictures were turning out, and unfortunately a train came through and they didn't hear it, and John unfortunately was killed in that crash. One of the other ones that we released was Kaylin's story. It's about a distracted driver. She was a young girl who they found had Snapchat opened on her phone as well as GPS. And so unfortunately she was distracted and did not survive the crash.
And she wasn't paying attention, decided to cross over the tracks, I suppose, and obviously the wrong time.
Right. There was another young lady, Kennedy, who was 13 years old, and some of her friends were train hopping. And so she thought that it would be a good idea to jump on a train.
A moving train.
A moving train.
Because you see it in the movies, right? I mean, why not? I've seen Tom Cruise do it 100 times.
Exactly. Unfortunately, she slipped and did lose both of her legs.
Oh, wow.
So, that was a truly tragic situation, but certainly a message to a lot of people. Chris's story was released. He was a young man who was going to go out with some of his friends, and he chose not to drive, which was a good thing. He didn't take his car. Unfortunately, he decided to take a bicycle back home. He took a shortcut through the rail, not over paved locations, and they feel like he must have fallen off and hit his head, and unfortunately a train came through. So that was, tragic. He was doing the right thing and not driving home.
Right. But not doing the right thing and not crossing where he's supposed to by law, and what I guess safety and common sense would dictate, I suppose.
Right. Very, very sad situation. And the last one that we released was Ashley's story. This was a young lady who was riding Amtrak with her family and a family friends. And unfortunately, a truck drove around the gates, and the Amtrak train hit them and derailed. And everyone other than her and her family and friends passed away.
Oh, my gosh.
And she lost one of her legs. So these are true stories.
Yeah.
I mean, they happen. And
I didn't even think about the reverse engineering, pardon the turn of phrase there, but when the accident happens, damage does happen to the train, and the potential for derailments and injuries and all kinds of. We were all talking about being crushed like a grape. I didn't even think about the people on the engineer,
right.
the staff.
Absolutely.
I don't know what staffing there is on freight trains. I don't know if there's more than a couple of guys. I just don't know.
We have an engineer and conductor.
Okay.
There's on today. It's
right.
on. No longer do we have to have a coal person to put coal into the trains, but we do have certainly have the train crew members that are on board, and those are the hidden victims in these situations, as we mentioned. They're just doing their job.
Yeah.
And they really don't want anybody to get in front, and they don't want to get hurt either, but they really are concerned about going through these communities and hoping no one gets in front of them.
And that's got to be I guess I put that responsibility, the phenomenal amount, being an airline pilot when you've got a great big airplane and you've got 300 people, that they're counting on you, a truck driver, just an over-the-road trucker. He's got nowhere near a train, but right. I mean, he's got a great big vehicle too. There's a lot of responsibility that goes in. You carry a lot of weight when bad things happen, because we hear wrecks, with truckers happens, and we'll hear the stories. The trucker wasn't charged. It wasn't his fault. It was somebody doing something stupid. But then the engineer, the trucker, the pilot has to live with that, because boy, what could I have done? I mean, there's so many levels to what seems to me to be such a simple way to stay alive. Simple.
Yeah. It is a lot of responsibility. And not only with passenger trains, these trains carry different things through our communities. Mm-hmm. Things that are as innocent as a whole car load full of honey sounds innocent.
Sounds sweet.
I love honey. Why not? So yeah, it's pretty sweet. But if we had an incident where that derailed, and it became quite an environmental issue, because the bees and insects that came while they were trying to clean that up, it was a nightmare. Yeah. But then, of course, you have hazardous materials as well, that if they derail in a community can be catastrophic to many people.
And a lot of these trains, as I'm sure everybody knows around here all too well, but a lot of these train tracks, I grew up in Vermont, and train was 30 feet behind my house. They're going through, it's not just driving through desolate lands in Nebraska, and it's not just going through city streets. You're talking riding through, in a lot of cases, neighborhoods that were built up around the train tracks, but you're passing in my backyard kind of thing. Well,
trains were a huge part of life many, many years ago. Of course, they are today. If you drink orange juice, it went on a train. I'm going to tell you that. If you want heat this winter, that coal went on a train. Still a very big part of our life. It was more of a social part back in the day.
Sure.
And so these towns did spring up around the railroad tracks. And, living closer to the track at that time was a huge benefit. I think today, of course, people are like, that train coming through and blowing its horn is aggravating.
Right.
But
or you're sitting there waiting for 25 minutes on Assembly Street, and you're late for work, and the train stops, and the guy needs to run in and grab a Big Mac.
Exactly. Well, we hope that doesn't happen. But, we just... they used to have a different kind of romance about them.
Right.
And I think they still do in a way, because that's why people love to take photos on the tracks or on train equipment. There's still some kind of allure and romantic feeling about the trains.
Well, Sheldon Cooper always wanted to ride on the train. He hated to fly. If you watch The Big Bang Theory, you know what I'm talking about. He wanted to ride on the train. And you're also talking about not just trains that we think of going through Columbia or going through Greenville or going through that. You know, we're also talking about, like, if you go to Atlanta where there's subways, where there's public transportation. I mean, those are trains also that people, I suspect, probably make some of the same fatal errors, don't they?
Absolutely. This is, an international program at this point,
right.
But certainly every state in the United States has a program, and many, many states do deal with transit. We have Amtrak, of course, that goes through our state. We don't have the small transit commuter rails, but if you go up to Charlotte, that is growing fast. And yes, we have materials that talk about how to safely get on and off of those modes of transportation, as well as to the public, learning that these modes of transportation are now going down the middle of a road sometimes, or just reminding them to be safe.
Right, places like San Francisco, you still have trolleys that go along right with traffic.
Exactly.
I've never seen them up personally, but I've seen all the pictures in movies and all that.
Yep, exactly. So it is a partnership between everyone trying to figure out all of the different ways that trains do affect our lives. And they are very valuable to our community, even though we don't like the whistle sometimes.
Especially when you're sleeping. Speaking with Janice Cowen from South Carolina Operation Lifesaver, an organization, a nonprofit, as she alluded to, is now international, but certainly a presence in all 50 states, including all over the state of South Carolina, with various education programs, safety reminders, and things that, I guess we sat and thought about it. It seems to be common sense, but as people say oftentimes, common sense isn't quite so common these days.
That's right.
But if you're just joining us, just recap a couple of stats, because it really sticks out in my head. Think about this: the train you talk about that's 4 million pounds. Your car is 2,000 pounds.
12 million pounds.
12 million pounds.
Yeah, even worse. It's 12 million pound train.
It's gotten bigger since I've been here.
Yeah, that's right.
Gosh. But think about that. It's traveling at 55 miles an hour, which is an average, not in the city, obviously, but an average trucking through, just trucking on main lines.
Right.
18 football fields, 18 Carolina football fields to stop that train. So if it comes around a corner and you've got, a couple hundred yards, well, guess what? That's not 18. That's about 16 shy of where you need to be safe.
Right. Clemson tracks, football fields too. I had a daughter at both schools, so, I got to be fair.
Fair enough. Well, I guess in the Citadel field, I guess everybody's field.
Yeah, everybody. It's all the same. But another thing we hadn't talked about, and this happens quite frequently, many intersections, you'll have a stoplight or stop sign on the other side of the tracks. And what we find a lot of times is, cars just going over, and then they start stopping, and unfortunately the traffic backs up.
Right.
What you don't want to do is find yourself behind a car with another car behind you, and you're straddling the railroad tracks.
Sure.
So anytime you get to a track, we have a little saying that says, if you don't fit, don't commit. So don't start across that tracks unless you know that you can get your entire vehicle on the other side. And then something to think about because around here people have boats and we haul trailers all the time, and your truck maybe. We talk about.
Remember, you've got a 14-foot lawn trailer behind you. You're not going to quite make that small slot.
Well, we work heavily with Department of Transportation, Department of Public Safety, Department of Education, reminding trucking companies, school buses, for heaven's sakes, make sure you realize how long your vehicle is and make sure you have enough room on the other side before you start across those tracks.
And that's a federal mandate, or at least state mandate, isn't it? That buses and things, because we all know school buses all stop, big trucks all stop before they cross, and that's a safety issue, just to ensure, because you've got 40 foot of vehicle behind you, that there isn't anything coming. Is that, I assume that's a safety requirement?
Absolutely, yeah. All school buses have to stop. And they have their procedures of opening the door, and we've done campaigns where we've asked the children on the bus to remember that they need to be quiet as well.
Sure.
When you get up to that crossing, if you're all screaming in the back of the bus that bus can't hear whether the whistle's coming or not.
Real quick, Miss Janice, what is the website for Operation Lifesaver?
Thank you. It's www.oli.org.
Okay.
And we're on social media all over, both
Perfect.
South Carolina Operation Lifesaver as well as our national office.
Fantastic.
And,
we'll put links for you at the Carolina Cares tab at WVOC. Ms. Janice, we appreciate it. And I know we could talk a lot more about trains and
Forever,
safety.
yes.
It goes by quick. We appreciate what you do, the messaging, common sense, guys. We'll put some tips and links and everything for you on the website. Thank you so much, again, for what you do in South Carolina and across the country as well. I know your counterparts in 49 other states. This has been Carolina Cares, an iHeart Media production. My name is Tyler Ryan. If you have an interest in a topic or would like to appear as a guest, you can email me, tylerryan@iheartmedia.com. That's tylerryan@iheartmedia.com. This has been Carolina Cares from our flagship station in Columbia, South Carolina. I will speak with you in 7 days.